Hey, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome to Havdalah. Great to see everyone there in the chat. If you're watching for the first time, we're so glad that you're here. If you're not in the DFW area, please let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear where people are from. After the announcements, Pastor Greg Stone will bring us the Shema, and then Pastor Greg Rosenberg and his wife Creasia will talk on their interracial marriage. Please join us for a 30-minute Zoom Oneg fellowship at 7 p.m. following Havdalah every Saturday. No different this Saturday, so we invite you to join us. It's a great time of community. The link is in the Havdalah event post in both Facebook and YouTube. Gateway is still encouraging community via online groups, but existing groups are able to meet in person. There's a 10-person limit, and you will need to practice recommended guidelines. I think we all know what those are by now. Please consider leading a Jewish group. If you can have a Shabbat group, or you can take all the video and written teachings and have a discussion group or even a study group. So please go to gatewaypeople.com/groups to sign up. We are thrilled to tell you about a new Gateway Jewish Ministries worldwide prayer event we will be holding monthly on Zoom. It will be the last Friday of every month at 7:30 a.m. Yes, I said a.m. Each month, we will be praying for one of our global Messianic ministry partners. Our first event will be July 31st at 7:30 a.m. We will be hearing from and praying for Rabbi Stuart Winograd from Reach Initiative International. If you were with us here at Havdalah on June 6th, Rabbi Stuart brought us the teaching for that evening. This is only a 30-minute time of prayer, but we will also pray for Israel, Jewish ministries, and the upcoming Shabbat service. Immediately after, we will have an optional prayer time for anyone on the call who needs individual prayer and would like to stay on. So basically, a virtual altar time. If you have a need or prayer request at any time, please take advantage of Gateway's desire to care for you by texting Connect to 71010. And now here is Pastor Greg Stone to bring us the Shema.
Hey, friend. So thankful that we're here together. And I have some announcements and things that I'm going to add to the things that Melody just shared. But first, I would like to lead us in the Shema. And so let me pull that up, and I think you can see it now. Praise the Lord. What you're looking at right now is an emblem or an inscription that is actually on the Knesset building in Jerusalem. The Knesset is like the equivalent of the Senate in Israel. And you can see that it's actually a menorah in there with the flames over the Hebrew words. And the Hebrew actually says, Shema Yisrael. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to say the Shema together. Here we go. It starts with Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kivod, Malchuto Leolam Vaed. V'havta et Adonai Elohecha, v'chol levacha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol meodecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavacha hayom al levavecha. V'shinantam b'vadnecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'derek uv'shachatbecha uv'kumecha. Uk shartam leot al yadecha vayu letotafot bein anecha uk tavtam al mizuzot beitecha uvish arecha. And then in English, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So, friend, that is the Shema. And I'm going to go back to the regular screen. exit my mouse. I don't seem to have lost my cursor for a moment. Okay, so I am in the middle of a bunch of programs and I don't know. There we go. Perhaps that'll do it. I think we're good. Thank you. I apologize for that. I've been having some computer problems lately, and I had to restart my computer 3 times in the last 15 minutes just before the program started. And so hopefully we're past that at this point. Let me say some things about the future of Havdalah and where we're going. When we get back to church being on campus, and of course we're pressing towards that, we can expect that at the very beginning, the only classes that will be offered on campus will be the growth path. There'll be a period of time like that, perhaps a month. I don't know how long that'll be, but there'll be a period of time where the only classes, the first class offered as Gateway kind of learns how to transition into this new world, we'll start out with just the growth path. And so Havdalah won't meet right away. We don't know when the first classes will start, August, September, we just don't know. And so, but when that happens, Havdalah will not start right away. And then, well, of course, there'll have to be that period with just Havdalah, with just growth path. And then, of course, not long after that, we'll come into the end of the year. And so it just, we're probably not going to have, I think we just need to count on the fact that we will not have any on-campus Havdalah until the spring of next year. So the spring equip calendar starts in February, and that will be the first time that we actually have an on-campus Havdalah event again. Everything else will be online. Now, what are we going to do online? Well, historically, we have followed the equip calendar. And what that means is that we have taken breaks. And when we've taken breaks, like, for example, in previous years, we have not had equip or Havdalah in May, and we have not had it in June, and we have not had it in August. But because of the COVID world, we have gone every week. The only week we took off was July 4th. But we've gone every week throughout all of this. So we haven't done the normal breaks that we normally do. And so we are going to go every week between now and August 1st. We will have a meeting on August 1st. And then we're going to take a couple weeks off. And then we'll come back on August 22nd. And then we'll talk about the calendar that we'll have for the rest of the fall at some point in the future. But for now, just so you know, we will not be meeting on campus until February, and we're going to meet every week between now and August 1st, and then we'll meet the 4th Saturday in August. Next week, I'll be talking about anti-Semitism. The following week, I'll be talking about a Jewish view of marriage, and we'll have a testimony from a man who's a very good friend of mine, Dr. Bruce Tucker. Dr. Tucker was the mentor for me when I went through TKU for my doctorate in Messianic leadership. And he's going to give a testimony about marriage and love. And then the following week, after the week of his testimony, when I talk about marriage, the following week he'll come and he'll actually teach the Havdalah, and he'll talk about love. I hope you got to hear Pastor Jimmy's sermon today. It was totally awesome. I was really touched by a number of things about it. One of them that really touched me was he talked about fasting. And I thought that was really interesting because we had our Shabbat service last night. And before the Shabbat service, we have an online prayer meeting. And during that online prayer meeting, I shared from Isaiah 58, the same verses that he shared on in this weekend's service. So I was just really, my heart was really caught by that. I encourage you to really pay attention, like, you know, get into that sermon. And perhaps you've heard, I've put it on Facebook, but I'm personally going to do a 3-day fast, August 2nd to August 5th. So August 2nd is a Sunday, and I'm going to start at sunset on Sunday evening. So it's kind of like Monday, if you will, in the Jewish way of thinking. So Sunday night at sunset, I'll start a 3-day fast, and it will end for me on Wednesday evening at sunset. So it's 3 days. And perhaps you would like to join me in that fast. I just personally felt like I was supposed to do this. And so then the thought came to me, Greg, why are you doing this alone? Invite other people to join you in it. And there are so many reasons to fast right now, friend. I mean, I should, I'm sure you're well aware of them. We've got the COVID situation. We've got racial tensions going on in America that are just beyond anything that any of us have probably experienced in our lives. The economy, we have our nation's political situation. We all have our personal walk and how that has gone during these times of isolation. And so there's many reasons for us to all be pursuing the Lord in fasting. And Jesus said, Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 6, he said, when you pray, he assumed we would pray. He said, when you give, he assumed we would give. And he said, when you fast. So he assumed we would fast. So you can watch my Facebook page, and I'll be putting some things on there that will just kind of help you know how to get going. But I'm really doing this for myself. But I encourage you, come on, go with me on the walk. I made the first post for this on July 6th. So you can look up my Facebook page from July 6th. Let me say some things about tonight, because tonight's Havdalah is going to be different. I asked Pastor Greg Rosenberg and his wife Creasia if they would speak this evening, and I'll invite them on in a moment. But let me tell you why I've asked them to speak, because there's so much going on in the world, but especially in the United States, with regard to the racial tensions. And I believe that Greg and Creasia have the ability to talk to us and help us understand things that, frankly, we would just not be able to understand. Greg is Jewish. This is a Jewish ministry. Pastor Greg is a volunteer pastor with me at Gateway in the Jewish ministries, and his wife Creasia is, of course, Black. So it's a mixed marriage, a Jew and a Black. That's perfect for us, and I believe they can understand things that, frankly, we just don't understand. And I really liked what Pastor Jimmy, when he talked about the whole racism thing. Can I just as we get ready to start this in a moment, I was not raised in a racist home. In fact, my Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, if you look him up on the internet, you could find that he actually marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963. So that's the synagogue I grew up in. My first, probably my second babysitter was actually a Black lady, and she named her kid after me. A few years later, she had a kid, so we got along really well. So I just wasn't raised in that. I'm not saying that I have the same kinds of fallen human heart as anybody, but I was not raised in a racist family. And so when Jimmy was talking, it was really, and he was so tender in the heart. And sometimes I can be like slow emotionally to catch things. And I was so blessed by the things that he shared and the way that he shared it. And I don't always know how to respond to situations. And I think that's why we just need help understanding some things. So we were going to start this we're going to do this originally with this idea that it would be an interview, like what Pastor Todd did when he interviewed a few of our Black staff pastors at Gateway Church, and he did that interview. And we thought we would do that at first. That was actually Greg and Creasia's suggestion. But as we talked about it more and more, we thought, well, rather than doing that, we'll just have them do everything. But while we were talking about the interview idea, they thought it would be helpful if they knew what the questions would be. And so I said, great, would you write some questions? And so they wrote a bunch of questions down. And I said, great, those are the questions. We'll just use your questions. And then I said, but there is one more question that I would like to add to the list. Everything you said, but there's one I'd like to add. And the question I'd like to add to the list is this. I think, and I could be wrong on this, I think that there's some things about anti-Semitism and some things about anti-Black racism that are the same. But I also think that there are some things about it that are different. And I could be wrong on that assumption. But if you would address, I said, would you address the things that are the same? Because if I understand what's the same, it will help me understand Black people better, because I'll say, well, I have that also. I understand that. But if I hear that there's some things that are different, and maybe there's nothing different, But if I hear there's some things that are different, then I'll be sensitive to the fact that there actually are some things about this that are different. And the reason I thought of this is I think sometimes people assume that it's always the same. And I've had people say to me, well, that's the same, or whatever. I'm thinking, but it just hasn't always rung with me. So I've asked them to come on, and I've asked them to be completely transparent. In fact, I've said it many times to them. They can take as long as they want, and they can talk about whatever it is that they think that we need to hear or they would like us to hear. And I'm going to step out. Greg and Creasia, can you join me on the screen? And I'm going to, hey, it's my friends. And I'm going to step out of the screen in a moment and just let them just go with however they want. I think they're going to do those questions, but they don't have to. So they really just have the freedom to do whatever it is they want to do, because I think that's the only way to do something like this, because they have insight, to be frank, that we could never get. So I really want to thank the two of you. You kind of putting yourself out there to share things. And I know some of the things are tender and painful memories, and sometimes we're slow to even want to hear it or slow to understand it. And so, but there's things we need to hear and should hear. So why don't is there anything that you want to say before I back out off the screen?
No, I think we're good. I think we're ready.
I know you are. and let me just pray for you guys,
okay.
And then I'll go. Father, I just thank you for Greg and Creasia. They are my friends. They're my really good friends, Lord, and I want them, Lord, to feel loved by you, and I want their heart, Lord, to be felt by people who are watching. And I pray for the longevity of this particular broadcast, because once it goes online, Lord, it will have opportunity. So we just pray, God, that you will guide it and you will lead it to the right people so that the right work can be done with it. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you for that introduction, Pastor Greg. We love serving with you. And so I'm Greg.
I'm Creasia.
And we are the Rosenbergs. And we get to serve here at Gateway Church and Jewish Ministry. I love serving with my wife. We'll talk more about that. But so for me, I wanted to show you a picture of my family growing up. If you can see that, hopefully, my mom and dad and brother and sister. And we grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. My mom kept a kosher home. We were considered, I guess, conservative Jews. And my father raised us that there are good and bad in every ethnicity. And so, I grew up believing that God made people. We're all the same. We all have red blood, and God cares about everybody. And I never really felt like anybody was more, although we're the chosen people on the one hand, but chosen for a purpose, which I found out later. But people are created equal. And I love Passover. It was my favorite holiday. Learned about God and redemption, and so grateful for all those things. Of course, Hanukkah, we got presents for 8 days, and the Gentiles got presents for 1 day. So we knew we were a little different there. We went to synagogue. The Gentiles went to church. My dad had a business selling minorities furniture in the inner city. So on Saturdays, I would go to work with him and meet all these different minorities, and he would get payments, and they got to know me. They would have cookies for me and all these kinds of things. And really, I grew up to love all people. We learned about the Holocaust. Growing up Jewish, you're going to hear about the Holocaust. We learned about that. We saw movies about it. Our family didn't talk about personal experiences a lot. We had some family that perished in the Holocaust. It was before my time. And so my first experience really with anti-Semitism was in 4th grade. I remember getting off the school bus and 3 guys jumped me, and they were punching me and kicking me and calling me a dirty Jew. And I was just really trying to block and defend myself. And they got me pretty good. I went home and my mom was freaking out. She was distraught about it. And my dad later that night, he said, you know, there are Jews and Gentiles in this world. And again, some are bad, some are good in both sides. But when things, there's going to be times where there are people that just hate Jewish people. They just hate Jewish people. I don't know why that is. They just hate Jewish people. And you have to be on guard for that and just know that it's not the majority of people, but those kind of people are out there. And so that was my first experience with anti-Semitism. Now, as I've gotten to know my wife, I want to give her more time to talk about this because she has more stories and more experiences, and I really have come to learn a lot more. So, hon.
All right. So one of the first questions Greg asked me was, what's a Creasia? So most people see me and they know I'm not white, but they can't quite put their finger on what ethnic group. So this is a Creasia. This is my mom, Rosita, who is a very proud Latin American woman, and my father, James Brown. And no, he's not the singer James Brown, even though he thinks he can sing. And so those are my parents, and they grew up in Kansas City during segregation. So they went to separate high schools and lived in different parts of the area. My mom's family came up working on the railroad, and my father's family, a lot of the women were domestics. Like if you've seen the movie The Maid, a lot of his mother, who even had a college education, was a maid. So that was, for minorities in Kansas City, there was very limited opportunities and areas they could work. So my parents met in a party in the 70s, like most people. So that would explain my eccentricness, because this was created in the 70s. And they decided to get married. Now, in America, interracial marriages weren't even legal until 1967. So to find someone to marry him and to get married, they left and went to Iowa. And then when they came back, you know, it was very important for my father to give his children the education and opportunities that he was not allowed to growing up. And so they didn't, people are familiar with red line laws. So my parents really moved us way out into the suburbs. So we moved up to Independence, Missouri. My parents got their first house, and I was very young, about 5 years old. But I even knew about then, that's when I really started experiencing prejudice, being not only the only minorities in the area, but my parents being an interracial marriage was even more of a threat. So growing up for me, one of the first things my parents always said was, it was very important that we know how to take care of ourselves, because they really emphasized to us that we needed to be able to cook, clean, and provide and take care of ourselves, in just in case something happened to them, if something bad would happen to them. Because being a mixed heritage, my mom felt that we wouldn't get adopted. So it was important that at this time, there's 5 of us, 5 girls, that we be able to stick together and take care of each other and raise each other. So that was always a fear growing up. And the fear was backed by the way my father was always being pulled over by cops and followed home and asked, well, what is a Black man doing out in this white neighborhood? So growing up, for me, it wasn't until, for me, growing up when I was a child and we lived in Independence, it was all about white and Black issue. And it wasn't until we moved to Blue Springs, when I was in junior high, that then all of a sudden it wasn't that I was Black, it was I was mixed. So then it was, well, you're Oreo and called zebra and called names. So that, that was always an issue, growing up. I can't think of a time that I didn't experience that. But also growing up with a diverse background, my dad was so good at teaching us Black history and being proud of our Black heritage. And alongside that, my mom was so proud of our Latino heritage. So, as a girl, your favorite holidays were Christmas and Easter. And I loved Christmas because we always made tamales. And that was just one of my favorite memories growing up. And so that, you know, it was good being raised multicultural, but it was hard because you just didn't feel like you fit in. You were either too dark for one group or too light for another group. So it, you know, but to me, I felt it allowed me to see the beauty in all, because I wasn't so focused on one ethnic group, that I was able to see the beauty of all ethnic groups and all people.
So I know Creasia's mom is watching right now. There are things that Creasia hasn't brought up that are really tough for me to hear, but can I have your permission just to talk a little bit about it? So Creasia actually witnessed her father coming home one day, and he was pulled over by policemen in his driveway, and he had to come out of the car, and they put him down on the ground, and they held a gun to his head. And Creasia was watching. It's painful for Creasia to say this, so I'm just going to tell this story. And I mean, no disrespect, Rosie. This is Creasia's mom. I know she's online. This may be so hard to hear again, but Creasia watched, standing next to her brother and sister, her father on the ground, because, again, a black man in a white neighborhood, and cops were yelling at him. And Rosie, his wife, Creasia's mom, came out, and the cops told her to get away because she had nothing to do with this. And she said, well, I'm his wife. He's my husband. And it had a profound effect on Creasia watching this from the bedroom window. And I think she was more concerned about her siblings watching this and what kind of an effect that would have on her and have on them as they were watching this. And just one other story that I want to bring up. There's a lot, and it is painful for her, but I really feel like this needs to be told. In church, Creasia would her mom and dad, of course, they went to church, and there was a church where the pastor's wife. Can you talk about that? You think?
My pastor's wife, I'm about 15, and my little sister were in Sunday school class, and the pastor's wife is talking about unequally yoked. She's using scripture, but she points to me and my little sister and says that we are an abomination to God, and that we can't be saved because the sins of our parents being married and being mixed, and that we were condemned to hell. And at that point, I grabbed my sister's hand and we left. And I told my parents, of course, what she said, and said, I know, growing up in church, that's not the Father's heart. And that's not how he views me and my sister. She doesn't get to determine, that's not her place. But it was one of those things that, stick in your mind. And so at that time, I had decided that I would help my mom out teaching Sunday school class to the children of the church, because if I couldn't change the older people's mind on racism or prejudice, I could change the hearts of their children. So for about 15 years, I worked in Vacation Bible School and taught little children's church, because I wanted them to have a different representation of what a mixed person or biracial person or someone of a different ethnic group was like.
Thank you for sharing that, hon. So then next question that we had. So those are some stories, of us growing up, some of the things that we experienced. And I'll tell you right now, one of the most beautiful things that I love about my wife is her heart. And she made a decision, and this is her faith, made a decision that she would not have a bitter heart growing up, that she wouldn't be like other people, that she would pursue the things of God, pursue what it is your faith that has gotten you through these times. And I just love that about her. She chooses to be thankful for her life, and she chooses to, again, just not be bitter, but to love people and have grace for people. So I that was one of the things that really attracted me to Creasia. But so the next question we wrote down is, as an adult working and finding your way in society, what are a couple of your best and worst memories as they relate to faith or race? And so, just I guess a good thing for me would be, I remember in the Air Force, I went in the Air Force, it was Passover time, and I got to go away and have a Seder during basic training, which was amazing. So that was cool. A couple of things that happened to me that were kind of tough is I had been on a couple of managers' jobs working at an aircraft manufacturing facility a couple times, and the hiring manager actually said to me, "We will never hire an effing Jew to be a manager in this company." And when he said that, I was so angry, and I wanted to report him, but I didn't want to ruin my career at this company. So I never said anything. And I just figured that, it'll all work out. I'll eventually get there or whatever. And then there was a guy one time, and I was working in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. And there was a guy in my shop, and I had just gotten there. And he called me over, and with a name like Rosenberg and this face, chances are I'm Jewish, right? So he said, "Did you know when fast food was invented?" And I just thought he was going to tell a joke, And I said no. And he said, "When Hitler threw the Jews in the oven." And I had this rage that just kind of balled up inside me. I really wanted to crack him, but again, I didn't want to lose my job. And I thought, I couldn't understand what did I ever do to this man? Why would this man just hate me because I was Jewish? He just met me. He doesn't even know me. And so those were a few memories growing up that just really stuck with me, that I began to see. I knew about the Holocaust, but I began to experience that there were people out there that just really, that my parents said this, but until you go through it, there are people out there that just hate Jewish people just because they're Jewish. And so that was something that I had to wrestle with and decide how was I going to respond to that. So how about you, hon?
Oh, for me, one thing I'm so thankful for is my parents gave me a strong work ethic. If you know my parents, just hard work. And my dad just retired at 70 years old. So, I was so thankful. So my parents also always told me that I could have or be or do anything in this world if I'm willing to work for it and put in the time. And so for me, working, the first time I experienced it, I would say I was in high school and I was waitressing at a restaurant, a national chain restaurant, and Desert Storm was going on, and I got sent home from work, and my shifts cut because customers were complaining because they thought I was from the Middle East. During Desert Storm, I went from being a black and white issue or being mixed to now that some people think I'm from the Middle East and I'm Egyptian or from Iran. And so, I would get sent home because my employer couldn't guarantee my safety. And then, and when I was older as an adult and I worked for a large grocery store chain in Lee Summit, Missouri, I remember the manager of the grocery coming back and they were like, "We need to send you home, but we need to walk you out to your car and everything, make sure you get in." And what had happened was in Lee Summit, there's a farm there that likes to have Klan rallies. And I guess they were having a local Klan rally, and they had papered all the cars in the parking lot with information about the Klan barbecue and rally that was going to happen. And so my employer was scared for my safety, and they didn't know if it was a customer that shopped there regular. So they kind of took me out of the back and, sent me home. And, even this last employer I worked for, we had a customer, but she spent a lot of money in our store, but she liked to, tell me that I was going to get deported when Trump got elected, and she liked to make very racial comments to me. So it got to the point that they had decided when she'd come into the store, I would go into the back room. So rather than, stop her from coming in, I would go into the back room until she left. And then they'd come back there and tell me I could come back on the floor. So for me, I have not worked one place where I haven't encountered a situation like that, or more than one.
Yeah, in fact, her last job, working in Southlake, Texas, she was bullied there. She's the only minority in the store, and I can take I can take the abuse when it's me, but when someone is treating my wife poorly, then you really find out what then the rage really comes, and so I just said to Creasia, she would come home and share these experiences with me, and I would get so angry, and then finally I just said, honey, I just love you, it's not worth it, let's just go ahead and quit, and I would rather have her home and be happy and without the stress than be working at a place that doesn't appreciate her. Because if you know my wife, she's amazing. She's the kindest, the soft-heartedest person you'll ever meet. And so to treat her, she doesn't treat anybody meanly. So I just didn't like that. And I was thinking as you were talking, in my adult life, I served with Jews for Jesus full time as a missionary after I became a believer in 1995. And I would be out on the street just, sharing the gospel and what have you. And I can't tell you how many times people would come up and say, the Jews killed Christ, the Jews killed Christ. And they would yell at me. Someone spit on me, like Christ killer and all these kind of things. And I would just be like, hey, if they, most of the time they were cowards, so they would just say it and run off or walk away. But if they would stay, I would say, is Jesus alive or is Jesus dead? And they would say, well, he's alive. And so I would, I show them John chapter 10, verses 17 and 18, but that it was his will. Anyway, another time I went to a KKK rally in Skokie, Illinois. I was stationed in Illinois for a time. And so I was out there and I'm handing out literature to people that are going to this rally. I was amazed at the language of the people going to the rally was just as bad, if not worse, is what the KKK was spouting out. But that was the first time I got close to skinheads. And some of these guys are really big. They are tattooed up, and they are scary looking dudes. And I mean, it just is amazing to me that people would just hate other races of people just because they're Jewish or they're black or they're Hispanic or whatever it is. They don't even know them. And so, when the Bible says that the heart of man is deceitfully wicked and evil, sometimes I think I'm not like that, but I know that I could be like that. If someone hurt my wife, the anger that rises up inside of me would make me angry. But I'm so glad for Yeshua that I don't hate people. I don't feel in fear. We do not feel, being Jewish and being mixed, we understand that, we're just believers in God and we've been forgiven and God loves all people. So it just is, it's almost incomprehensible to us. Okay, so how did we meet? We met at the grocery store. She had a chicken hat on. I went up to the grocery store and she was wearing this hat. And I said, wow, what kind of a woman would wear a chicken hat? And she was working behind the deli counter. And so I went up there to order some meat and cheese. And she looked at me and said, you look kind of distraught. And I was going through a really tough time in my life. I was going through a divorce. And she said, well, God has a plan for you. And right now you're going through a tough season, but you'll have a better season eventually. Season will change. And so that's the first thing she said to me. And long story short, I said, you know, when the divorce is over and everything's done, maybe we could go out and have a cup of coffee. And so I came back after the divorce was final and asked her for that coffee. She wanted to see the divorce certificate. And so I didn't have it with me. I brought it up the next week and we went out. And I went to pick her up. And, you know, when I first saw her, she was in the chicken hat and an apron. I really couldn't tell. But then when I picked her up, she's short like me. She's curvy. She's beautiful. And we went out on a date, and we've been dating ever since. I got to know her heart. I mean, I just fell in love with who she is, such a beautiful person. And then I said, well, you know, I'm having feelings for you. And if you're having feelings for me, we need to go on a mission trip together. And so I took her on a mission trip. We went to the Vancouver Olympics in 2010. And here she is out on the street. And she had a conversation with this, I guess he's a Buddhist guy. And I was just so proud of her because she was going to cook for us. And then as it turned out, we didn't need a cook. So I gave her a 30-minute lesson on how to talk to people. She knew how to talk to people, but she'd never been around big crowds. And she went out there in the midst of crowds, and she was shaken, but she was handing out literature. And I really knew then that this would be the woman that God had for me to marry. So that's how we met. What do you think?
Okay. Well, I tell people I met Greg because I have praying parents. I had been married for 10 years, and it was a bad marriage, a very ugly, bad divorce. And so I was pretty much scared of men and didn't want to get into a relationship or ever get married again. And it had been 7 years, and my mom, every time I saw her, was like, I'm praying for a husband for you. I'm praying for a husband for you. And she'll tell you to this day, I would get so mad at her and say, Mom, I don't want a husband. Don't pray. And my dad and her would always say, well, when God does it, you'll be okay with it. You know, so when I met Greg and I go to tell him there's this guy asking me out and he's Jewish. And I said, when you were praying, were you guys stuck in the Old Testament? Were you guys fasting in the book of Leviticus, you know, and everything? So, you know, he literally, I would tell God, you know, if you want me to get married again, you're going to have to drop him right in front of me and, you know, put him right in my path. Otherwise, you know, I'm not interested. I just take care of myself. And literally the next week, Greg asked me out for coffee. So I was like, oh, okay, I better go out with God. My parents are praying, and some guy comes up to my work and asks me out for coffee. So I'm like, I probably should, you know, check this out a little bit more. You know, if you would have told me, I had no idea how God was going to use that and change my whole life. And I tell people, you know, the best advice I give girls is, you know, you have a list growing up of what you think the man of your dreams is, but God knows better than you do. And it could show up in any kind of package. You know, you never know what package. Mine's happened to be a 100% Jewish boy. And I remember before we went out, he comes up to me and he goes, I need you to know I'm Jewish, as if I couldn't tell. And I said, well, you know I'm not, so do you know what you're asking out? You know, does your mom know? Even though we were grown adults, you know, I was like, did your mom know who you're asking out? You know, so it was a concern, you know, before we even went out. It was like, well, how is our families going to react to this?
So the next question, what attracted you to the other? Well, I already mentioned, you know, she had the chicken hat, and that's intriguing to me. What kind of a woman would wear a chicken hat? But I wasn't really looking to get remarried again. But, you know, I went out with Creasia, and she talked about her family. Family's very important to Creasia. She loves her mom and dad, and she speaks well of her mom and dad. And that was attractive to me because that's important to me too. Family's very important. And I don't remember if I mentioned she's short, she's curvy, she's beautiful, and she loves the Lord, and she serves in church. And so she's silly, sassy, good looking, and got good cooking. I mean, all of these qualities in my wife that I just love. And quite honestly, you know, I love the color of her skin. She's tan, and she can cook Mexican. She can cook soul food. You know, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, right? So I think that still holds true. So she's a good cook, and I love the cultures coming together. And so I remember when we started dating, her father said to me that when you go up, we were going to go to the Ozarks, and we were going to meet another couple down there in the Ozarks. And her dad, who is a Marine, never a former Marine, but a Marine, and he said to me, "You better take a gun with you, because if anything happens to my daughter, I'm going to come after you." And he was serious too. And I have a concealed carry, and so I obeyed him. I mean, you know, I took it with me, and I really didn't understand that until I went down. You know, we were in the Ozarks together, and it's really interesting. A lot of times, I'll wear a Jews for Jesus shirt, and I'm looking for how people are reacting to that. You know, you get a lot of looks when you wear a shirt like that. But now I'm with Creasia, and you know, Creasia Philippa Rosenberg, and I'm noticing the looks. And people just have a lot of nerve. I mean, they just were looking at us and giving these disgusted looks. And I thought, wow, I just can't believe that there are people that are like this. And so, you know, as we've been married now for 20 years, I've been married to her for 10, and she's been married to me for 10. So 20 years we've been married. And, you know, we go out and I still notice that some people give us these looks, and I'm just absolutely amazed about that. So, but what attracted me to my wife, I just think, I mean, obviously her outward beauty was very attractive to me, but my wife is the kindest, gentlest person, the best person that I know. And she really is a thankful person and a very positive person. And I so respect her because of all the things that she's gone through in her life. She's not bitter. And she loves the Lord, and she chooses to be a loving person. And that is just so incredibly attractive to me. So how did our families accept one another? How did
Well, I think it was interesting with Greg's family. He took me to St. Louis to meet the matriarch of the family. Her name was Sarah, Aunt Sarah, and she's about 90 years old at the time. And so we go to St. Louis, and we go to this restaurant, and we sit down, and she looks at me, and she looks at him, and then she sends him to the bathroom, and she says, you know, first thing she says is, you've got to have some Jewish ancestor in you. And then she said, you're a good match. You should marry him. Now, that I wasn't think, but to have that right off, and she was supportive from the first time she saw us together. You know, she thought we were very good. She would say I was good for the family and I was good for him. And then his mom, asked me to make matzo ball soup, and so I made it, and it was, you know, I tell people part of my testimony is for 15 years I worked as food in the catering in the area, and 85% of the area was Jewish. So I did a lot of bar mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs, and I tell people, you know, you don't know why you're doing certain things in your life, and then years later it's because God was preparing you for something that He had planned for you. You know, He has great plans for your life. And you don't know, and then when you look back, you just see how He's worked things through your life, you know. So, you know, it was his family. Like this necklace is from his mom, and she passed away this March. And before she passed away, she wanted me to have her necklace, which is the hand of God. And she said, she tells, you know, we're in the hospital room, and she says, I want Creasia to have that because the hand of God's on her. And so his family, I was just overwhelmed. His family is all of them have been so, you know, accepting. You know, they invite me to every bar mitzvah, every wedding, and they've just been very open. This table that we're on. Right here is the table he grew up having the Shabbat dinners that his family gave me. And I've got his grandmother's china and everything. So, I mean, in his family would, they would ask me, because I had embraced, the Jewish holidays and doing the Shabbat dinners and stuff. And it really moved his family. And they'd be like, why are you so accepting of our Jewish culture? And I said, because, and I told his aunt, and they're like conservative or, more Orthodox Jewish. And I said, because of the Jewish people, they gave me my Messiah and I owe them everything. And I would tell his, family that, loving you is loving my Messiah. Loving the Jewish people is the best way I can show how much I appreciate the sacrifice that God made for me to graft me in to the promise. So.
Yeah, I think we're both very blessed. Creasia's family, they accepted me. She has two sisters that are married to white guys. And there was never an issue. My family loved her and accepted her. Her family accepted me. I think being Jewish, that was something they were a little unfamiliar with. And then being a believer in Jesus. And so, I don't stop being Jewish because I believe in Jesus. And so being a Messianic and still celebrating the holidays, like we invited them to a Seder the first year, and I think they didn't really understand why would we be celebrating a Seder now that we're married and I'm a believer in Jesus. Why do a Seder? But as they learned, and God bless them, they have open hearts. Well, long story short, now they have a mezuzah hanging in their house at the front door. So it's been a journey, but I feel like my family has adored Creasia from the beginning. I can't imagine what people went through probably 10 or 20 years ago because marriage has its challenges. And if your parents are not for that, if they're not accepting of your spouse, then that would just be horrible. It would be very difficult. But that was not the case in our marriage. I would have to say that both families accepted us. My family loved, adored, still does. You. So, yeah. So let's see. How do all the recent, share some experiences about what it's like being married as an interracial couple. Well, first of all, I'll go first. So first of all, I had to learn, which I signed up for this. I learned about Black culture and Latin culture. I was very excited to do that. When we were dating, Creasia said, I want you to know that Barbie comes with accessories. And I said, I don't know what that means. And she said, well, you need to see my closets. So now we're still dating, mind you. And so I went and looked at her closets and maybe this is an all women thing, or I don't know. I think culturally, maybe a little more so Black and Latino, but I looked in her closets and I was like, wow, you have hundreds and hundreds of pairs of shoes and clothes. And I said to myself, well, you've got everything that you'll ever need. I mean, I saw a department store in there. And the concept of replenishment never entered my mind. Of course, after you get married, then you learn that there is a concept of replenishment here. But I love learning about Black culture. I love learning about all cultures because God made everybody beautiful. So, the food is good. Rosie, Creasia's mom, taught me how to make tamales, and I just love learning about the different cultures of her family. And she has certainly embraced the cultures of my family. So a lot of positive things. Now, I will say I have become more empathetic than I was before because I've become more sensitive. I have learned a lot about Black history. I didn't learn this in school. I wasn't taught about what happened like in Tulsa, or Blacks were put in zoos. I mean, I would just say that it is really mind-boggling in this country the way that Blacks have been treated. and I am more empathetic. I've learned to be a good listener, and I can empathize with my wife and the family. And so these are good things for me to become more empathetic. And I also am more guarded about my wife. And my radar is always up and scanning, how people are going to treat my wife. And
I, growing up, when we leave this country and we go to Europe, for me in this country, our marriage is looked at one way, but when we leave this country, we're treated, and nobody even gives us a second look.
Yeah.
When we leave, but when we come back home, it is. And so, my best way of explaining it is that his life would have been different if he was raised in Europe, Eastern Europe, where they have the higher increase of antis. And my life would have been different over there versus here. To me, it's almost like some of the same issues and prejudice, but you're looking at two different continents, two different areas. So I think if we were both raised or born or lived in a different country, it would be different.
Yeah. Obviously I'm white and I'm Jewish, but I can hide, I'm in the majority here. So, but Creasia, because of her skin color, it's not an option. So it is very interesting how people look at that. Why did we pick Gateway Church?
Okay. Well, for one, I picked Gateway Church because they had a Jewish ministry. For me, thanks to God, I know who I am, and I know who God says I am. And I'm not going to hide, I'm not ashamed of my ethnic. I'm named after both my grandmothers. My parents blessed me with giving me their mother's name. My dad's mom's name was Creasia, and my middle name's Felipa, which is my mom's mother's name, which is Phyllis in Spanish. And so for me, if you can't be who you are in the house of the Lord, then where can you? And it was important to me being married to Greg and him being Jewish, that he was able to be the Jewish man of God that he is in the church. And so I was very much attracted to the fact that Gateway had a Jewish ministry. So,
yeah, when we moved to Texas, we just never heard of Gateway Church. I never heard of Gateway Church, and Creasia was online, and we were looking for churches. We had been to some churches, and we talked to the pastors and what are their thoughts about Israel and this and that, and it just never was a good fit. But then she saw that Gateway had a Jewish ministry, and I had to go check that out. We had to go check that out. And we went and saw Pastor Greg teach on Hanukkah. It was our first time, and we've never left. I mean, it's just, I was in a church denomination for 13 years before, and I never heard Israel brought up or anything about God's plan for the Jewish people. And I'm not going to say that they were replacement theology, but just never any talking about God's plan for the Jews and the Gentiles, and God loves the Jews. He loves the Gentiles, and he saved one to save the other. And so Gateway, I love Pastor Robert's heart to the Jew first. And God has given him an incredible burden to love the Jewish people. And that's the kind of church I want to go to. I wish more Jewish people knew that there were churches out there that really do love Jewish people and just want to love on them. And so, Gateway has been a blessing. What is it that we like serving together in Jewish ministry? What is it like serving together in Jewish ministry at Gateway?
I'm able to use the talents that God gave me. I think we both have strong in different areas, and I feel like with your strong, I set the table. My gift, God, I'm very good at hospitality and presentation, and so I am able to set the table, and then you're able to explain why the pieces are on the table. And so, that's it really, I really enjoy it because a lot of the Jewish ministry too revolves around holidays, and who doesn't love a dinner or a party?
That's one of your giftings for sure, hospitality. I love serving the Lord with my wife. And Jewish Ministries is a place where we can both serve together. There are many couples that serve together in Jewish Ministries. I just think God I think the purpose of marriage is to glorify God and show people what a God-loving marriage looks like. And we get to do that in Jewish ministries. She is such an encourager to me and just frees me to do the things that I'm gifted to do. And I get to watch her do the things that she's gifted to. I mean, just amazing. I love watching people react to the things that she does in Jewish ministry. So let's see. Why do we love serving Holocaust survivors in ministry? Do we feel it has impacted them?
Okay, for me, it was something, the first time I heard it, I said, that's what I meant to do, because it was all the experiences growing up, all the horrible hurts and things I had experienced through racism, prejudice, but I knew what it felt like to be healed, to be able to give that over to God, and what it's like to release and not let it embed in your heart and be a sense of bitterness and hardness. And so I thought, well, if there's one group of people that know what it's like to be hated just by your appearance and not even know you, it's the Holocaust survivors. And I just knew that that broken part of my spirit would be able to connect with the brokenness in theirs. And that when they looked at me and they talked about, how the Gestapo would hold a gun to their family, I would say, I know what that hopelessness feels like. I know what that hurt, and you never get over it. Even though it's many years later, it's still, even though it's still a pain, it still hurts when you talk about it. And so I just wanted them to see what hope looked like and what love looked like. And I always felt a connection to show them what love and hope looks like, that you don't have to stay trapped in that pain forever, that you can be released from that pain in your heart.
Yeah, I love, going to visit with Holocaust survivors and hearing their stories, tremendous stories of courage and perseverance. And I can pray Kaddish for their loved ones that perished. It's a Jewish prayer that we say when someone's passed away. It's a prayer that glorifies God. And I see the connection that they have with my wife. I mean, they know that she's been through some things too, because in America, obviously the way Blacks and minorities have been treated in America. So they have a real point of relating to one another. And then, just going over there and listening to stories and offering to pray for them and just loving on them, bringing gifts to them. We love doing that. We're so grateful that Gateway Church has a heart to do that. And so this will be our 4th year, Lord willing, that we'll be able to go over there, and we're building relationships with them. And I mean, I'm wearing a star now that was given by one of the survivors over there. Our mezuzah comes from one of the survivors over there. And so we communicate weekly. We say Shabbat Shalom to one another and we pray for them. And so we're just building relationships with these survivors. We can't think of anyone on the planet who's really gone through more persecution than the Holocaust survivors, so it's a privilege. Here's a question I kind of skipped over by accident. Let's see. How does the recent protests affect or impact our marriage?
Okay, for me, it opened up a line of communication from my parents. I have one part of my family that are very active in the protests. They're marching, they're angry, and so they're supportive of it. And for my parents, they didn't understand why I wasn't so irate, but me and one of my brothers, Stephen, we were able to communicate and explain to them that our experiences were different than my parents. We didn't have the same experience, and for us, it wasn't just a black or white issue, because we had experienced just as much discrimination, I had in the Black community and in the Hispanic community. And we talked about family and how a majority part of my mom's family didn't accept me and my siblings, and still don't accept or talk to us or acknowledge our existence based off of our mixed heritage. And, you know, on my father's side, the Black community, you're not Black enough. Some of them, you know, believe Blacks should stay with Blacks and stuff. You know, you have, you know, some of them that are accepting, but, you know, then you have the others that don't accept you. And so, you know, for me and some of my siblings, it just it's not a Black or white issue. More, I try to tell people we kind of live in the gray area, because we, you know, it's like neither one is too accepting. Neither one group is too accepting, you know, of us. So, you know, it was just, you know, we were upset for different reasons. And this was allowed communication for the first time for my parents to hear my heart and hear my perception of events. And so that was great. You know, it took almost 50 years, but that was just really freeing for me to have my parents actually hear what I had went through and my perception of it.
I feel like we've had a lot of discussions about it. You know, we see a lot of things on TV. We have a lot of discussions. And again, I'm just really learning to listen more, 2 ears, 1 mouth, and to try and feel what is being said to me. Because it's very easy to get defensive about things, or you know, for example, you know, Black Lives Matter. Well, to respond to that and say, well, all lives matter, it's really kind of a foolish thing to say, because if I were talking about the anti-Semitism I've experienced and I say Jewish lives matter, well, I don't want to hear all lives matter. I want you to understand what I'm saying. You know, I'm being very vulnerable in sharing with you this, that Jewish lives matter, and then for you to just say, well, all lives matter, it's very insensitive. And so, you know, we've had a lot of discussions as a result of the protests. I went to one in South Lake, actually, and I went to listen to people, to show my support, to talk to people, and I had gospel conversations, you know, because we all agree racism is a problem, and, you know, it's a heart problem. And what will change a person's heart aside from the love of God? I don't know anything. You can legislate, you can teach, you can have programs, and all those things are good. But I'm saying that the root of this problem is sin. It's an evil heart. And unless you're willing to let the Lord come and change your heart, then nothing's going to change. It's not going to change for long. That's for sure. What are some things that are the same in anti-Semitism and Black racism? And what are some things that are different? Well, you know, in Judaism, the three primary, some things that are the same, really. We have Orthodox, we have Conservative, and we have Reform. And not everyone in each of these denominations of Judaism, but Orthodox are the most strictly observant, and they believe in the Talmud. There's a lot of tradition, and they sometimes will look down on someone who's a conservative and say, well, you're really not walking in the ways of Moses. You're not being a good Jew, you know. And then and you're driving on Shabbat, and then they will look down at the Reform Jew and they would say, you know, you're so far out of the will of God that my goodness, I am way better than you, because really it's a works-based thing. And then, you know, and it's interesting when people, like when I came to Texas and people met me at work, and then they got to know me, and that's great. And then we would go out for a lunch for the holidays, and then Creasia would come walking in, and I would just look at their faces, because they did not expect me to be married. It's a very common expression. People are very surprised when they see Creasia and I together. And and we have a very diverse staff at work. And some of them, you know, of course, are Black. And then they will talk to me about some of the things, and I can say, well, I totally understand where you're coming from because you've met my wife, Creasia, and I've heard her story. So I can relate, and I can also say, even in the Black community, my bride has experienced a lot of racism because she wasn't dark enough for some, and her hair is different. And so I think both in Judaism and in the Black community, we have to guard our hearts because there is prejudice, and call it racism, call it prejudice, call it what you want, but we have pride and we have an inferiority complex that we're better than other people. So I think those are some things that I think some other things that are the same is, whenever the stuff starts to hit the fan, the Black protests, they're vandalizing Jewish synagogues. I mean, it's just that old hatred rising up. We're going to hate the Jews. We hate the whites. We hate the Jews. The Jews are the same as the whites. Well, yes and no. We've been through some different things than non-Jews have. So we were on the freedom buses with you guys, with the Blacks, so we just, I think generally speaking, we understand a little bit different. Anything?
Yeah, well, the Black race, I think that what people don't know, that a lot of the laws that Germany used came based off the laws that America used against the minorities, a lot of the Jim Crow laws and stuff. So, where they were implementing certain things like, where Jewish people could live and put them in ghettos, they were doing that the same thing in America, where minorities could live and so, a lot of the things that they were implementing against the minorities in America, they were implementing in Europe against the Jewish people, where they could live, where they could go to school, what they could own, if they could own anything at all. So I think that there is a similarity, and that's why we're able to really understand each other more.
And then I think in an area it's different. In the United States of America, I don't think Jews have experienced the same level of persecution as Blacks. I mean, we weren't slaves here in America, and now there's been some persecution, there's been killings, but not anything in a scale that was compared to the Black experience. I mean, we had Jews fight in the Civil War on both sides, for the North and for the South, which is kind of mind-boggling. Jews tend overall to be more liberal. I think Blacks tend to be more liberal, but I think more and more Jews that are falling in love with the Lord, and okay, so that's what we got for you guys. Hopefully some of this has been a blessing for you. And Pastor Greg, thank you for having us come online and be able to share. Yeah.
That was really, really, really very, very heart gripping. Thank you. Thank you for sharing from your heart the stories that you've experienced in life. And I'm very thankful to call you guys my friends. Just as a little reminder for everyone, they wrote all the questions except for the one that I added. Say, could you talk about what's the same and what's different? It's that last question there at the end. They actually wrote the questions. So they were reading the questions, but they wrote the questions. And so that way they knew what they would be covering. I hope that you will join us. There's a Zoom afterglow. We call it an Oneg in Judaism. And so I hope you'll join us for the Zoom meeting afterwards. You'll be able to ask Greg and Creasia whatever you want to ask them. I did think it was really, really, let me just say one thought as they were talking. Creasia's ability to relate with Holocaust survivors is really remarkable. And Greg's as well. And you can see the two of them and the tenderness that they have towards each other, and the fact that they are able to love like they do and be friendly like they do. And you know who that reminds me of? It reminds me of Holocaust survivors, because they are the friendliest, most tender people because of what they've been through. It's like hard life can sometimes tenderize a heart. And so maybe you're going through a hard time right now. So let me just pray with you right now. Father, I just thank you for every person who has been listening to this evening, Lord. And for whatever reason, they might be going through a very difficult time and their heart is being tenderized. Maybe it's related to COVID. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's related to some other health concern or some financial concern or a racial concern, Lord. But Lord, I know that you really love all people. The word became flesh. You love the human body. And so, Father, I just thank you that you use this meeting to direct all of our hearts to be more loving and more kind and more compassionate, Lord, towards one another. In Jesus' name. We'll close with the Aaronic benediction. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav alecha v'hunecha, Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yasem lecha. Shalom. Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov. Have a good week. Hope to see you in the Zoom meeting. God bless you.